In the beginning, after a great devastation, the gods came and manifested humans again. And this is a theme that we see repeated all over the world.
There is a continuity in the stories that cannot be dismissed. One of those continuities is the story of the Great Flood.
That's reflected in the Babylonian text, in the Hebrew text, in the Egyptian text. They all mention something similar.
When you do a deep survey into the myths from around the world, it talks about a dark world and the end of an age. And then there's this cataclysm and this flood occurs and the individual escapes the flood. And then after that, it is the beginning of this golden age.
My punishment is having written a book titled The 12th Planet that was published first in 1976. Among other things, it brought to life an unknown civilization, the Sumerian civilization, which blossomed out in the southern part of what is today Iraq. Ancient times it was called Mesopotamia. And just to orient you, this is Egypt here. This is the land of Israel. Canaan is Arabia, Turkey, or in earlier times Anatolia or Asia Minor is up there. And then there were two great rivers, the Euphrates and the Tigris, and the plain between them was where civilization, high civilization, first blossomed out, especially in the south. Many are more familiar with the much later civilizations that followed of Babylonia or Assyria further north. But the origin of everything that we nowadays consider as a must of a high civilization, be it the use of a wheel, be it the use of the kiln, be it the use of bricks for construction, high-rise buildings, codes of law, judges, priests, taxes, anything that we deem in science, in technology, in art, music. There were musical instruments. Everything began in Sumer. And I can talk for hours about the greatness of the Sumerian civilization and all that it bequeathed to us. But very quickly, I'll just mention two of their firsts or innovations. One was writing, and they introduced writing on clay tablets of this size or other sizes, using a script that is called cuneiform, that the scribe formed with a stylus, a piece of wood, on wet clay, and when it dried, it became a permanent record. Literally thousands and tens of thousands of clay tablets, some of them with much longer text, and I may show you or refer to one or two or several of them in a few minutes. But this is the way the writing was, the cuneiform writing. And much of what civilization has attained over the 6,000 years since this began is due to writing and the discovery of ancient records, written records from antiquity. Another of their innovations is called a cylinder seal, where they cut, and nobody knows how, out of stone, sometimes precious stone, sometimes another stone, a cylinder. Sometimes there was a hole running through it because the owner of the seal carried it on a string around his neck. That was like his seal. That was how he signed documents. And the artist, the ancient artist, somehow carved in reverse as a negative, the images or the writing or whatever that then was produced by rolling the cylinder seal on wet clay to create a positive permanent record. So it's also another first, the rotary press, if you want. And to jump from all the step by step and page by page, first in the 12th planet and then in the subsequent book, The Stairway to Heaven, that dealt with subsequent Egyptian and other civilizations, eventually with the Americas and so on. I'm cutting short all that. And the main thing that people remember from my writings is that I showed the evidence that there is one more planet in our solar system, planet that some refer to it as Planet X because it's both unknown and the 10th member, the 10th planet in our solar system. The book, by the way, is titled The 12th Planet because the publisher shortened it because it was the 10th planet, which is the 12th member of the solar system, because there are sun, moon, and 10 planets. We know officially only of 9. So he said, forget it, you know. We'll call it the 12th planet. But it's really the 10th planet, the 12th member, the 10th planet. And that through a series of events, I mentioned them in the previous talk, in this expo, through a series of collisions and other events, it appeared from out of nowhere, from outer space, got attracted gravitationally into our solar system, ended up colliding with another older planet, creating the Earth and our moon, and the asteroid belt and other aspects of our solar system that astronomers are unable to explain unless they adopt the Sumerian cosmogony. But it itself got caught into a vast elliptical orbit around the sun. The sun is here. Of course, it's not to scale. And an important thing to remember, that was why there was this collision, because while all the other planets that were formed as part of the solar system originally orbit counterclockwise, this one orbits clockwise, and thus there was a collision about here, where the asteroid belt is today. And roughly, and I'm stressing that this is a mathematical number because the actual orbital period varies from orbit to orbit depending on where the other planets are located and their gravitational pulls, etc. But one can say mathematically that this takes 3,600 years. So once in about 3,600 years, this planet, quite a large planet, comes back to our vicinity. As I mentioned, the Sumerian cosmogony was quite sophisticated, explaining many enigmas that modern astronomy has yet to explain. And the question is, How could they know that if they didn't have, which they did not have, although they had high-rise buildings and quite an advanced astronomy, they did not have telescopes. So how did they know that? How did they know how the solar system began, etc.? And they answered in their tablets and said, all that we know was taught to us by the Anunnaki. And the term in Sumerian literally means those who from heaven to earth came. And there are quite a number of texts which I quote in the various books, including one very important book titled The Lost Book of Enki. And the tale is that a group of 50 astronauts came to Earth from that extra planet in our solar system, which the Sumerians called Nibiru, literally meaning the planet of the crossing, and indeed its symbol from time to time, especially when it neared the Earth, was the cross. So the symbol of the cross goes back millennia ago, and did not start at the time of Jesus. And they said that that original group of 50 astronauts splashing down in the Persian Gulf and wading ashore to what later became Sumer, Mesopotamia, etc., the land between the two rivers, was led by somebody called Enki. Enki, he had other names, Ea, which meant Lord of, or he of the waters, because he was the prototype of Neptune. Enki meant Lord Earth, because he was the first commander of the Anunnaki who came to Earth. And there are statues discovered in ancient Sumer of him. And this is how he looked. He was bearded. He wore this horned headdress, which was the symbol of their divinity, distinguishing them from us people. And uniquely, which is not clear, I think, I'm not sure, in this slide, his fist is gilded. So this is a stone statue, but his fist is gilded, because this indicates, which I have elaborated upon in my various writings, was the purpose of their coming to Earth. Because on their planet, they were losing the atmosphere. If they would lose the atmosphere, all life would end on the planet. It will get freezing cold. It's only the atmosphere that kept the inner heat and made life possible on their planet, Nibiru. And their scientists found that only a shield of gold particles could protect the atmosphere. They discovered, and it's all told in great detail in the book by me, titled The Lost Book of Enki, which is based on actual autobiographical tablets dictated by Enki to a scribe, explaining to us and future generations who they were and why they came and what happened here when they were here. So this is the way Enki looked. And as things went along and others came, including his half-brother, titled or called Enlil, Lord of the Command, who took over, and this created or prolonged or transferred to Earth rivalries that started way back on their planet about rules of succession and who controls the planet and who is called the king and other conflicts. Always, by the way, between, in all these tales, between half-brothers. So Enlil came too, and they established their first settlements on Earth, where Mesopotamia and later Sumer have developed. And if one, as I did, if one takes all these various cities of the gods, and puts them on the map, a pattern emerged, and the pattern included a central point, which was called Nippur, which comes from the Sumerian Ni-Hebrew, which means the point of crossing, and the other name for the place, and that text that described why it was so called, was Dur-Anki, the bond between heaven and earth. This was the mission control center of the Anunnaki. And all the other cities were concentrically located, so this was like the center, and indeed one of the nicknames of the place was Navel of the Earth. And they also formed a pattern of a landing corridor. So this was Mission Control Center, this was the spaceport, and it all was anchored, you don't see it on this drawing, on the twin mounts of Ararat, which are the highest mountains in the Middle East, and stand out as one nears the earth and tries to land in Mesopotamia. The actual name in Sumerian for that place, when it was just cities of the gods, was Edin, home of the righteous ones, from which comes Eden and the biblical tale of the Garden of Eden. All that, however, at some time, which I calculated was about 13,000 years ago, a deluge, the great flood described in the Bible, occurred and wiped everything out, burying everything under millions of tons of mud. And this is one of the ancient tablets describing the flood almost in the same words that the Bible does, except that this tablet was inscribed several thousand years before the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, was written. So after the flood, the Anunnaki needed to rebuild this whole setup of a mission control center and concentric locations linked to the landing corridor, again anchored on the twin mounts of Ararat. And what emerged from studying and comparing and using maps and aerial maps and so on, it emerged that the focal point, the new post-diluvial Dur-Anki, bond heaven earth, was a place that we now call Jerusalem. That was the post-diluvial mission control center. And the landing corridor was anchored or included four let's call them space-related points. One was here, and we know it as Giza, where the two great pyramids are. One was here in the mountains of Lebanon, where a vast landing platform had existed. And then, of course, Jerusalem as a mission control center, and it all led landing spacecraft and those that took off to a spaceport in the Sinai Peninsula. This is the Sinai Peninsula, precisely on the 30th parallel, and I explain in my books why the 30th parallel. So this is a map of the Middle East, one can say, in the Near East, Middle East, showing you those four space related points. The spaceport in the Sinai, the two great pyramids of Giza, and the Sphinx, the landing platform in Lebanon, the landing platform in Lebanon, and Jerusalem as Mission Control Center. Now, what happened to those 4 points that were the link between them and us over all the millennia and centuries following the deluge? I wrote a special book, a separate book on the subject titled The Wars of Gods and Men, because all those places were greatly affected and indeed put out of commission, some of them, most of them, as a result of wars that those Anunnaki who came here, who almost destroyed their own planet through wars and the use of nuclear weapons there, ending up continuing those rivalries and conflicts here, leading around 2024 BC, the time of Abraham, to the use of nuclear weapons on Earth. This is the biblical tale, reflected in the biblical tale of Sodom and Gomorrah. So let's see what happened. The first place, we're starting from the south, where the two Giza pyramids, the Great Pyramid, the Second Pyramid, and the Sphinx. And there are actual text, long text, detailed text, describing the wars over the pyramids, which I titled in my books, the Pyramid Wars. And there were several of them. And this is one indication or one commemoration of the victory by a son of Enlil called Ninurta over a son of Enki called Marduk. You see the 3 pyramids, and he was the victor. That was his symbol, the eagle. And you see the victory wreath over the 2 pyramids. So this is, by the way, though this is not the subject of my talk, and not of the book, The 12th Planet, but this is a side remark about this whole business that some Egyptian pharaohs, somebody called Khufu, around 2600 BC, had the ability to build those pyramids, including the magnificent and unique Great Pyramid of Giza. And the text dealing with that war described what equipment was inside that pyramid and what was destroyed, what was removed, and so on. So though the 2 pyramids still stand because they are massively built, their equipment was removed and their functioning was also brought to an end as a result of those wars. Then the spaceport in the Sinai Peninsula. There's no doubt that there was a spaceport from which a spacecraft took off, and this is one illustration of many and of textual evidence. And this is a depiction from the tomb of somebody called Hui, who was the governor in ancient times of the Sinai Peninsula, the Egyptian governor of the Sinai Peninsula. And along the walls of his tomb, one can, by the way, see a replica of all that in the Metropolitan Museum in New York. There are all kinds of depictions from the lands where he was a high government official, including the Sinai Peninsula. And this depiction shows ground level here, because that's where you see trees and animals and so on. And it shows an underground silo with a multi-stage rocket ship and the command module protruding from above ground. And I just have on the side here a comparison to a depiction from Sumerian sources of the spacecraft of the Anunnaki. And you can see that it is virtually identical. So there's no doubt, and this is just, as I say, one illustration of quite a volume of evidence that leaves no doubt that there was a spaceport there. The famous Sumerian king Gilgamesh, around 2900 BC, looking for immortality by joining the gods on their planet. That was one of his destinations, hoping to be carried aloft from the Sinai Peninsula. Now, what happened to that spaceport? We saw what happened at Giza. As I mentioned, around 2024 BC, one of the wars between the competing, clashing clans of the Anunnaki led to the use of nuclear weapons, and one of them, or actually two of those weapons, were used to obliterate the spaceport in the Sinai. This is a NASA photograph of the Sinai Peninsula from space, and you can see the huge cavity still visible, and all the cracks in the surface of the peninsula that resulted from that. So the spaceport was literally vaporized. I've gone to the Sinai Peninsula several times while it was Egyptian and Israeli and back Egyptian control. And in that place where you see this great cavity, which is in the center of a valley surrounded by pure white limestone mountains. You see the pure white. There's a huge valley covered with blackened, burned through stones, totally broken up and totally burned through. And this is what remains to this day of that spaceport. Now then, there was the landing place up there, if you recall, in Lebanon, in the Cedar Mountains. It was also one of the destinations to which Gilgamesh went. And the Epic of Gilgamesh, it's a story written on so long and so detailed that it's written on 11 tablets, actually refers to the place there as the landing place. And at the night, when he arrived at the place, and before he tried to enter it, an attempt that next day failed for various reasons, which are told in the Epic, he actually describes seeing a rocket ship being launched. And the text is given word for word in my book, The Stairway to Heaven. And there is other evidence of what actually was there on this landing platform. And this is a Phoenician coin that shows the structures, later structures, temples that were built there. And you see the fenced-off area and a rocket ship on a podium. So this is not a drawing by me. This is a Phoenician coin from several thousand years ago, and this is what it depicted at the landing place. Now, I also went to that place. That place is known today. It's called Baalbek. And there are books dealing with it, describing it, including books by travelers who went there in the 19th century. And this is one of the sketches, or they called it at the time woodcuts, by one of the travelers. who drew, not painted actually, drew what is famous in that place. And this is 3 colossal stone blocks, not lying at ground level, but atop of other rows of quite large stones. And there are 3 of them, 1, 2, and a third one, known as the trilithon. And each one of them weighs 1,100 tons. And even today, there's no piece of modern equipment that can lift such a weight. Yet in antiquity, according to my findings, even before the deluge, somebody built this whole huge complex and placed here for reasons of need to support whatever activity went on there, 3 of those colossal stones. This is a person shown here just for comparison. Now, not only did somebody cut and then place 3 of those, but we actually know that is a photograph from one of the visits there. And if I'm not mistaken, this midget here is me. I think so, right there. And this is the first one of the 3, by the way, and then there are 2 more. We know where they came from because about 1.5 miles away from that platform, a huge platform, roughly paved stone, about 5 million square feet. That's how huge it was. That was where the quarry was, and one of those colossal stones is still, as they say, in situ. It was carved or cut out of the native rock, but here at this end it is still the carving or the quarrying has not been finished. And again, this is me, and this is a guy that operates taping equipment, and he is in this room today. So this is how huge and how incredibly constructed the place was. Now what happened to it? It was also destroyed in various wars. Afterwards, other conquerors going back to Assyrians, Babylonians, Hittites, Greeks, Romans, everybody came there and tried to build their own temple on top of the other ruins. The Romans built there the greatest temple to Zeus in the whole empire, including Rome itself, was there. And at one place near those trilithons, you see the colossal stones forming like a funnel, and you can climb down and down and down, and it continues even below ground level. And there's no doubt, in my mind at least, especially after visiting the place, that this did what Gilgamesh describes, a launching site. So it's also been destroyed in those various wars. So the only one that is still extant is Jerusalem. This is, I assume, an aerial photograph of the Temple Mount that many of you are familiar with. This structure is called the Dome of the Rock, which stands like a cover over the rock. It's a sacred rock on which at the time of the Jewish temples, the one built by Solomon and the second one, this is where the Ark of the Covenant stood upon that sacred rock. And this is the western wall. This whole area is surrounded by a wall. This is the western wall, sometimes called the Wailing Wall, because for 2,000 years since the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD, Jews have never stopped coming to this spot to bewail the destruction of the temple. Now, once the Israelis took back control of the so-called Old City of Jerusalem, which was held by the Jordanians for a number of decades, they permitted excavations to see what is down there in the continuation of this western wall. It is obscured by structures where people actually live, by the way. You can walk from one place to another in the old city just walking on the roofs. And everyone over the generations wanted to live as close as possible to the sacred place. So there are all these buildings. So there was a archaeological digging and what has become known as the archaeological tunnel alongside the western wall up to its northern end. And lo and behold, in that western wall, just as at the western wall in Baalbek, 3 colossal stone blocks have been discovered. They don't weigh 1,100 tons each, they weigh only 900 tons each. And it's still, of course, an enigma how they were placed in place and so on. This is another shot with the group that was with me there. So you have those similarities between the platform in Lebanon, the landing place there, and the platform in Jerusalem that served not as a landing place, although it might have to some extent, but as the place where Mission Control Center was. So now jumping the centuries, the millennia, to what interests people today, and the earlier part of my presentations here last evening dealt with 2012 and the Mayan calendars and this whole issue of the end of days, which is on people's minds. So though I've said many times and repeated in my books that in order to know the future, you have to know the past, because the past is the future. All the scriptures keep saying, I'm Alpha and I'm Omega, the first things shall be the last things, and so on. But one needs to explain it, one needs to support one's conclusions with actual data, be it illustrations as I've shown, or from text. So I wrote about 2 years ago, it was published 2 years ago, a book titled The End of Days. I want to point out the subtitle, and sometimes the subtitle is as or more revealing than the title, and that is Armageddon and Prophecies of the Return. And this is what this book deals with, and this is what I want to talk about now. Now, what I've done in this book is to try to explain to people who read my books or who read the Bible or are interested in biblical prophecies, or even in the so-called Mayan prophecies, is that one has to know precisely what the Hebrew Bible says by knowing enough Hebrew to understand it. And if you do know that, if you read the scriptures not in translation, because all translations are interpretations. If you read it in the original, I said in this book, then you realize that all these prophecies in fact speak about two events, two occurrences, and not one. One occurrence was called in the Bible, in translation into English, the day of the Lord. And the reference was to a celestial Lord. And this example is from the prophecies by Amos, around 750 BC, where he speaks about the day of the Lord and says it will be a day of darkness and no light and other celestial and natural phenomena caused by whatever will happen on the day of the Lord. Another prophet, Habakkuk, was even more specific, about half a century or a century later, and described from where this celestial Lord will appear. It shall come from the south, and so on and so forth, and how it will look, and etc. And if I switch, which I do in the book, to parallel from about the same time, Babylonian, Assyrian, etc., similar prophecies. Some even refer to those texts as Akkadian prophecies, because the mother tongue of Babylonian and Assyrian was called Akkadian, also the mother tongue of Hebrew, by the way, describe it so specifically that I could draw a sketch of what those predictions or prophecies are saying. And you can see that they're really talking about this planet, Nibiru, renamed Marduk by the Babylonians in honor of their national god. They dealt with its reappearance, what it looks like when it's here and what it looks like it's there, and it's, like Habakkuk said, coming from the south, etc., until it will reach its point of perigee, where it becomes the planet of the crossing with the cross symbols, or Nibiru in Sumerian. Now that so-called Day of the Lord, the reappearance of the planet in our vicinity, jumping a couple of chapters in the book, did occur. The planet did return to our vicinity and caused an unexpected and unusual total solar eclipse in 556 BC, and this is taken from a NASA report about that event, which is recorded in the ancient writings, not just in the Bible, but in Assyria, Babylonia, by the Hittites, etc. So the planet did return around 556 BC. So regrettably, all those that link what might happen in 2012, or if you calculate somewhat differently, in 2087 AD, what will happen because of Planet X, its return to our vicinity. There's no basis, in fact, for those predictions. And as I pointed out, what I tried to explain as best as I could, I hope convincingly, in the book, is that the prophecies consisted of two parts, one dealing with the day of the Lord, which had taken place, and one dealing with what is called in the Bible the end of days, in Hebrew, Acharit Hayamim. In the various translations in English and in other languages. It is rendered differently or variably depending who translated and from which prophet it is, whether it's from Isaiah or other prophets. So it's referred to as the end of days, the last days, the final days, and some other terms. I find more accurate the term the end of days. And those prophecies, without any doubt, certainly those in the Bible, all deal with the centrality of Jerusalem. At the end of days, an event or a time which will be preceded, as predicted among other places in the book of Revelation in the New Testament, will be preceded by upheavals, by wars, by all kinds of calamities. But eventually, it will be followed to the expected messianic times in which Jerusalem plays a central role. The rebuilding, the reinstating of Jerusalem as Dur Anki, the bond heaven earth, is the central conclusion or prediction of all those prophecies. Now, the question that one then asks, so if one aspect of those prophecies, the day of the Lord, the return of the planet itself, had taken place, and are still to be fulfilled, the prophecies about the end of days and whatever will occur there. When will it happen? What are we talking about? And this is not a new question. In the Bible itself, in one of its last books, that the book of Daniel, he spent most of his time, and the book deals most of the time with this issue of when is the end of days. I don't know if one can read from the distance that you're sitting at all these things, but his answer, the answer he was getting from the angels was always that it will be at the end of time. It will all happen when the time will be fulfilled. So in terms of the Sumerian tale of the planet Nibiru, the Anunnaki coming from it, etc., what are those end of days prophecies talking about? And the only logical conclusion is that if they are not talking about the return of the planet itself, then they must be talking about the return of the Anunnaki, the return of the gods. And here I made this sketch especially to remind me, to make the point that the coming and going of the Anunnaki, of the ancient gods, between their planet and our planet, did not necessarily coincide with when their planet was at its perigee point, becoming the planet of the crossing, of the cross. As a matter of fact, it could not happen exactly at the same time, because the orbit, this vast elliptical orbit, meant that as the planet orbited, it almost came to a standstill at its farthest point, called the perigee, and gathered speed as it was more and more attracted by the solar system, literally swooshing around the sun in maybe 2 or 3 years maximum, being thrown back, thrust back out into space to make again its vast elliptical orbit. So the two did not coincide, and the Anunnaki, that takes dealing with comings and goings at all times and different times, could either use spacecraft to go ahead, to be launched and arrive on Earth before this perigee point, or they could afterwards sort of slow down and fall back into closer to the sun areas of the heavens and land on earth, and not necessarily only on earth. So these texts and these prophecies are dealing with the return of the gods, return of the Anunnaki, with all that it may imply, good or bad, or their increased involvement in our affairs or otherwise. Now I want to show you this drawing of our solar system as we know it, not with planets orbiting the sun, as is usually shown, but stretched out. The closest is Mercury, and then the other planets, the large Saturn, Jupiter, and then Saturn, and then Uranus and Neptune, and finally Pluto, stretched out. Now when we talk, or when we read about Earth, the reference is sometimes made, especially in New Age literature, that we are the third rock from the sun. So there's Mercury, Venus, and Earth. But as far as the Anunnaki were concerned, coming in from there, from far out into this more inner solar system, Pluto was 1, Neptune 2, Uranus 3, Saturn 4, Jupiter the 5th planet, Mars was the 6th planet, and Earth was the 7th planet. And indeed, that was one of the epithets or nicknames for Earth, the 7th planet. And in my researches, I looked at actual cylinder seals, or more often than not, their imprints. I came across this one, which is kept at the Hermitage Museum in Russia, in St. Petersburg. And what does it show? It shows someone on the 7th planet with its moon, looking like a winged deity, which was, by the way, the meaning of the Mesoamerican name for Quetzalcoatl or Kukulkan, the winged serpent, and depicted as a feathered winged being with a beard. So somebody on Earth, an astronaut or a god on Earth, is greeting or communicating with somebody on the 6th planet, a planet with 6 points, the 6th planet, that is also dressed as a kind of astronaut, except this one does not wear a helmet and this one does. And between them is what, to my eyes, looks as a spacecraft. And if it's not, then somebody has to say what it is. And before I move on, I want to point out that all this depiction of, let's say, a god astronaut on Earth greeting or communicating with one on Mars, with a spacecraft between them, there's a date on this depiction when it happened. And the date is not according to our AD or BC calendar that is based on the presumed day of birth of Jesus, and it's not based on the Mayan calendar. It is based on the calendar of the Anunnaki themselves, who, coming to Earth, needed some kind of a medium to be able to compare their 3,600 years orbit, which to them was, by the way, just 1 year, one orbit, 1 year, with ours that takes place 3,600 times in one of their years. So they devised the zodiac. It's a whole subject. I don't know if I'm going into it or not today, but and this is the Pisces, the age of Pisces. So in antiquity, in the age of Pisces, there was this communication between the astronauts on Earth and the astronauts on Mars, and that was the spacecraft between them. And this date is not insignificant. Now, in the British Museum, there is this circular tablet that the museum keeps in the section devoted to the development of writing. They don't find anything more exciting about it. But actually, this is a sky map. Sky map divided into 8 segments, and it's described in detail with other photographs in my book, The 12 Planets, so I will not dwell the whole time on that, but just on this segment here, one of the 8, and regrettably, it doesn't show too clearly on this slide, but basically it shows the route in the heavens from a large rocky planet here to the area where our sun is, to the center of our solar system. It says here there are seven planets depicted, and it says the God Enlil passed by these planets. God Enlil, the half-brother of Enki, passed by these 7 planets, which, if we count, meaning from the outside of our solar system all the way to Earth. And it shows that there was a route correction or some kind of other detour between 2 planets whose names mean Jupiter and Mars. So an actual sky map showing the route of Enlil, in this case, from their planet to our planet, passing by 7 planets and making a route correction or a detour between Mars and Jupiter actually exists, which I think is really a fantastic thing. Which brings Mars into the discussion and into the picture. Now, in my book, The 12th Planet, based on the Sumerian text and other statements, I said that Mars served as a way station, as a base for the Anunnaki on their way between their planet and Earth. And that, I must admit, was one of the points in my writings that was criticized by some who disagreed with my conclusions, because at that time, the book was published in 1976. At that time, Mars was considered a totally dead planet, uninhabitable. It has no water, it has no air, it has nothing. Nobody could exist there, and nobody, of course, could build a base there, and certainly not gods, because there was no such thing as gods. It's all mythology. So, but I said no. All the Sumerian evidence clearly states that Mars served as a space base. And there were comings and goings, and there was a certain group of the Anunnaki called Igigi who had their base on Mars, 300 of them, and so on and so forth. Well, now, after more than 30 years, we know better. There's no disagreement that Mars once was a watery planet, and had oceans, had lakes, had rivers, etc. And this is from one of the scientific magazines dealing with that. Actually, a photograph of water ice was taken from one of the spacecraft orbiting Mars. And there's no doubt that not only that there was water on Mars, there is water on Mars, and this is water ice showing there. And other finds about methane on Mars and other chemical compounds, etc., leave no doubt today in scientists' minds that Mars was habitable and maybe even had life on it. Now, this is all recent. Now, back in the 1970s, if you remember, NASA sent some spacecraft that orbited Mars and sent very intriguing photographs. And this is one of them from an area that was named Sidonia. And it showed, right here, the famous face. At the risk of losing the equipment, I'll turn back. Look at this. The face with the mask, with the helmet. And look at this. So there's no doubt that this is a carved face, and there are other photographs since then, and so on. Though NASA still claims that it's just some natural rock that happens to look like this or like that. Now in that area where the face is, the Sidonia, there's also an image of these structures, which I'll show you in a minute, but of this circle, this obvious circle in the ground. Now, at the time NASA was questioned about it, or they said, well, this is caused by a drop of water on the camera lens. And the media printed it. And when I read it, I said, waterless and airless Mars could lodge a drop of water on the camera lens, so of course it's nonsense. Now this appeared in other photographs and in subsequent photographs. And obviously this is not natural because there are no perfect circles in nature. So what this is, I don't know to this day, but when you look at those remains of whatever, this is what it is. This, by the way, the circular thing. These are remains of some walled structures whose walls run at 90 degrees to each other, and there's no natural mountain or whatever in nature that runs at 90 degrees. And there are no straight lines in nature. When you study archaeology, one of the lessons teaches you that everything in nature meanders. So if you see a straight line, it's artificial. So this one is at 90 degrees. And there were these photographs from those 1970 observations of Mars. And there was this one, sometimes called the Pentagon, and so on and on and on. And it's all in my book titled Genesis Revisited. Now, in recent years, NASA has been sending not only orbiters that orbit the planet and take pictures, but also rovers that actually landed on Mars and are wheeled and can move about and are equipped with 2 or 3 cameras and take pictures. And one of the questions that at least I'm asking repeatedly without getting an answer is, why are those rovers sent all the time to some regions on Mars? And the reason always given by NASA is that maybe there's a trace of life there, maybe there's this, maybe that. So we are sending them to that valley and that desert and that mountain range. And my question is, why don't they send them again to Cydonia to see what the face is and what those 90-degree walls are? But they don't. So they send them to some new places on Mars, and even those photographs sent back by the rovers are embarrassing. For example, this is one of the pictures sent back by the rovers. Now, this is definitely a cotton-shaped rock. This is not natural. And then there are those that are white as if they are marble. Again, this is 90 degrees there. And then there's this one. I put it on my website, thought maybe that will provoke NASA. This is actually NASA photographs, which shows the remains of some walls covered with sand or dust or whatever. This one even looks like remains of a step pyramid. The odd thing is when you look beyond that, what looks like a wall, you see some rectangular areas marked off. There's one there, and there's one there. There's some rock that is circular with a hole cut through it. When you look carefully at the photograph, you can see what's beyond it through this opening in the circular rock. So what is that? And nobody gives an answer. Now the reason, in my opinion, why nobody gives an answer and why nobody has returned to Cydonia, because they don't want to find what they will find, is because of something that happened in 1989. And I describe it. I was the first to reveal the circumstances in my book Genesis Revisited, and I call it there the Phobos incident. Others have referred to it as the Phobos accident, but I say no, it was not accident, it was an incident. And in 1988, I think July 88, the Russians sent 2 spacecraft to examine a satellite, a moonlight of Mars called Phobos. One of 2. There's a smaller one called Deimos, and a larger one just I think about 5 miles across, that's called Phobos. It is presumed that these are some kind of remains of planets, maybe from the asteroid belt or something, that were caught into orbit around Mars. But the Russians were puzzled by this one, Phobos, because when its weight, that can be measured by its orbital pattern, and is compared with its size, it is too light. And the Russians suspected that it's really hollow, because in one spot there's like an opening, as if like an entranceway, supposedly a natural crater by some impact, but it's too perfect and too circular to be natural. So they suspected that this is an artificial satellite. And they sent 2 spacecraft called Phobos 1 and Phobos 2 to orbit Mars for a while and then go and examine Phobos and bombard its surface from about 50 meters above the moonlet with laser beams in order to remove the layer, which could be dust or other matter, natural or not, and see what really is this made of. So the two spacecraft were launched in 1988. One of them, Phobos 1, was lost. Nobody explained how or why it was lost. The official explanation was that in this control room of the mission control room, one of the controllers leaned on his desk or whatever, and unintentionally pushed the button which directed the spacecraft to fly into who knows where, and it disappeared. Phobos 2, however, did make it to Mars in March 1989, and started to send, this is, by the way, Phobos, the moonlet. That's how it looks. Totally dark, by the way. It's the darkest object in our solar system. That's another picture. This is an old photograph of the moon. Okay, so the Soviet spacecraft Phobos 2 did reach Mars and started to send photographs from the planet. And among them was this elliptical shape. And the Soviets admitted at the time that this is the shadow of something between their spacecraft, Phobos 2, and the ground. Something there. And in an interview, which I have on tape, the head of the Russian scientific team said, well, some may call it a flying saucer. We don't say that, but some may call it a flying saucer. And this was taken in one of the cameras of the spacecraft, the regular camera, and it was equipped also with infrared, which takes pictures just by the emission of heat, and it's still there. It's still there. So seeing that, the Russians decided to discontinue the fly over Mars and to send the spacecraft for its real mission, and that is to bombard Phobos moonlet from 50 meters above with laser beams, and that spacecraft also vanished. But before it vanished, it managed to send back one more final photograph, and that's the one. And it shows the moonlet Phobos with a rocket coming out of it toward the Soviet spacecraft Phobos 2, which disintegrated and went out of commission. So that's why I called what happened in 1989 the Phobos incident and not the Phobos accident, and what happened afterwards in the relations between superpowers. All kinds of arrangements were made between the US and the Soviet Union, how to handle contacts with other intelligences. But it's all in my book, and copies of the documents that were signed. So I won't dwell on that. But there's no doubt, this leaves no doubt, that someone there, or some robot left there, or some other kind of setup was there to tell the approaching spacecraft, you are not going to bombard me with laser beams. So I think this is the reason that NASA does not go back to Cydonia, and they send the rovers here and there, which again send all kinds of perplexing photographs. Now this happened in 1989, almost in March 89, almost 20 years ago. And now there is, for some reason, I don't know the reason, although I have friends even in the European Space Agency who tip me off about this and that. So I don't know the real reason. But there is a renewed interest in this moonlet Phobos. And the European Space Agency has managed to obtain new, fresh close-ups of the moonlet. You see here this crater. You see what could be natural craters from impacts, but not, in my opinion, this one. But what maybe is not clear in this shot or in the slide is that there are like grooves running, parallel grooves running on the surface of Phobos moonlet. And the explanation was in the past that as there are all kinds of impacts by asteroids or who knows what, they sort of bounce off and scratch the surface and leave those marks. Well, that explanation was acceptable for most of the time until I found out that the grooves were actually mapped by the European Space Agency. And you can see not only how parallel they are, but that they're also going in circles. Now, if an asteroid hit the moonlet and bounced off, I don't think it returned and said, oh, wait a minute, I've got to make a circle before I leave. So these are not impact marks. This is marks of something moving on the surface of the moonlet. And then I found that the European Space Agency took additional close-ups of the moonlet Phobos and admitted that there's something odd there, and that is, they said, this is the first object in the solar system that has a blue surface. On the rim of the so-called crater or circular opening, there is a blue patch. And if you take another close-up, this is how it looks. Now, I was mulling and had another slide arranged in a certain way. I was mulling, showing this to you at the very beginning of my presentation today, and tell you this is a photograph of a bracelet. And can you guess of what metal is it made? Because there's no doubt that this is metallic. Copper, maybe this, the inside lining of the so-called crater, but not this. So now, is this the result of shooting the rocket 20 years ago, removing whatever dust or other material obliterates the true nature of the surface? I don't know, but this is what one sees today on Phobos. So there's no doubt in my mind that this is, as the Soviets have suspected, an artificial satellite. It orbits Mars precisely all the time along the equator, which, no, it's our moon is more or less around the equator, but it veers a few degrees this way and that way, and so do other moons of other planets. This is always stays precisely along the equator of Mars. So is the interest by the Europeans. The Soviet, now Russia, are also planning to go back. The Japanese are planning a mission to examine Phobos, and other nations as well. So I suspect that they all know that something is afoot. And this brings me back to this depiction, dated the age of Pisces. And in case you forgot, we are now in the age of Pisces, which will end before the end of this century. And if you read the book of Revelation and its prediction, by the way, it predicts that Babylon, today's Iraq, will be split into three. And I think no matter what the US or the Iraqis or others do, it will split into three parts. This is the prediction in Revelation. And this is the prediction about Armageddon, which says the book itself says, comes from the Hebrew Har Megiddo, which is a mountain in Israel. And lo and behold, a few months ago, not even a year ago, the remains of the first church in the Holy Land were discovered at the foot of Mount Megiddo, Armageddon. And what do you find depicted on the floor in mosaics? Pisces. So I think that all these are omens telling us something in answer to the question, well, when will the end of days come? All right, the first question that just picked up is who named the time, or the zodiacal time, Pisces? The answer is Enki. As Nibiru approaches the sun, it should become visible to the naked eye as only as a bright point of light. That is correct. How many years out of the 3600 would Nibiru be visible from Earth? The observations reported in Assyria and Babylon for the previous time, or last time it was here, started between a century to 2 centuries before its perigee. The story of Enki that I translated from tablets. Where are those tablets now? Oh, they're all over various museums in England, at the Louvre, in Germany. Many are in Philadelphia, by the way. So they are all over. The sources for the book, Lost Book of Enki, were about 800 different texts and fragments and etc. In recent years, other Pluto-sized bodies have been discovered beyond the orbit of Pluto. Why didn't the Anunnaki tell the Sumerians about these bodies as well? I don't know.
These are very similar.
With such an extreme orbit, why isn't Nibiru a frozen planet, unable to sustain life? Well, that's really a very important question because it keeps being asked. And the answer can begin with saying, why aren't we on Earth frozen? If we go up, not just in a plane, but certainly in an orbiting spacecraft, just a few miles above the surface of the Earth, we'll be frozen to death. So why aren't we frozen to death on the planet here? Because of our atmosphere. It's the atmosphere that keeps the heat. Now, most planets, and there are many studies, including very recent ones in the journal Science and Nature, about Jupiter. Jupiter, as an example, not only has internal heat from radioactive and other elements in the planet, but actually emits more heat out into space than it ever receives from the sun. So if a planet has its own natural internal heat, as virtually all the planets have, the question is, does it have an atmosphere? If it doesn't have an atmosphere, life would not be possible. Everything would freeze. If it has an atmosphere, it creates like a hothouse effect. And this was really the reason why the Anunnaki came here, because they were losing their atmosphere, and without finding a way, which was with gold, to protect it, life would end on their planet. So this is a key question, and although I've given the answer in my books and at every possible occasion and meeting, etc., it's kept being asked, but it gives me an opportunity to give the reason and the explanation. Well, it is not something I talked about today, but the question is, how long did the women in Israel, ancient Israel, cry for Tammuz, which was the name for the Sumerian god Dumuzi, who was killed, or his death was caused by his older half-brother Marduk. And it's a very interesting story, because it was supposed the two clans tried to make peace by intermarriage, and the goddess Inanna, better known as Ishtar, was betrothed to Dumuzi, a son of Enki. I don't know for how long, but certainly the reference in the Bible is at the time of the prophet Jeremiah. So this is sixth or so century BC. After all the information you discover, do you believe in God? Well, if you can define God, I could answer that. It's a good question, but it's very complex to answer unless the question is developed. Is it just a history book?
Of religion.
Religion?
Yeah, he wants the topic.
Or is religion just a history book, lesson? Or is there any merit to any of them, to all religions? Well, religion, in the narrow sense, began, like so many other things, in Sumer, which was the worship of the Anunnaki, gods with a small g. And then it diversified to national gods and to clans. Those who followed Marduk, those who followed Sin, those who followed Enki. They were given Egyptian names. They let people do the miracles. They were called Quetzalcoatl. So religion, I think, can be separated at least into two parts, probably into more. One is the one of ritual. You do this, you don't eat that, etc., which just developed over the ages and doesn't really, is not basic to faith. And the other is faith, in believing that there is some higher entity and this leads to the question of God. I do believe that there is a universal creator. If any religion teaches that, then it's a valid religion. Phobos appears artificial. Your comments on our moon, I should give comments on our moon. Is our moon artificial? No, our moon is not artificial. There's a whole part of the epic of creation. I skipped over it, but how the moon came to the celestial entity called in the text Kingu, how it became our moon. So it's not artificial. What do you think Anunnaki plans are for us on their return? Well, it depends who the leader now is, because the attitudes were different at the time of one of its nearing, when the great flood or deluge occurred. Enlil wanted to use the opportunity to wipe mankind off the face of the earth. Enki, who treated mankind more like his creations, because he and the goddess Ninhursag were involved in the genetic engineering, treated us more as, not us, but humans, as his creatures, his responsibility. So it all depends who is coming back now. If we go back to the events of the deluge, in the Bible, the reason is given that Yahweh, the biblical God, who was Yahweh, is another subject. I do have in my book, I think, Divine Encounters, a whole chapter about, it's titled God the Extraterrestrial. And if it strikes you as odd, then by definition, if he's not one of us, then he's an extraterrestrial. So the Bible says that Yahweh, the antagonistic deity, which in the Sumerian text is Enlil, said mankind turned out to be evil, and therefore it should be wiped out of the face of the earth. And if the Anunnaki come back, whoever they are, will they find evil upon the earth? And no doubt they will. So if these are the Enlilites who are coming back, they'll say, how about repeating the deluge? In the Akkadian text, the Babylonian version, the reason was that there were too many, not that they were evil, but these creatures, the children of the Adam, there are too many of them. They fill up the earth. They are in our way, you know. They don't give us peace. So are there too many of us on earth? Maybe. So I don't know. I think the best way to find out is to be around when they come back. Are you training others to read the tablets? No, I have no time for that, but one can learn. It's not impossible. We have another half hour. Do you know from the interpretation of the tablets if Earth is the only planet they visited to mine for gold? Well, they definitely visited Mars, but if the question is limited to mining for gold, there's no text that I know of that says so. So we might be the only golden planet. Has anyone tested the black residue seen on the walls of the inside of the space platform. Why do you think NASA and our government, I thought that NASA is part of our government, is so afraid to admit the truth about Mars? Well, that's a question in general. Well, there is a cylinder seal in the Museum of the Ancient Near East in Berlin that depicts, it's called a mythological scene because it shows the god of agriculture granting the plow to mankind at the beginning of agriculture. And as often happens on other cylinder seals, the background is decorated with celestial images. And on that particular seal, catalogued as VA243, there is a depiction of a solar system with a sun, a star in the center, surrounded by planets. And when I compared it to what we know about our solar system, it shows exactly our solar system up to and including Pluto, referring to a previous question, in the correct order, the correct sizes, etc., plus one more planet, which is the Nibiru that comes and goes. So I obtained from the museum a photograph with permission to print it, and wrote about it in the 12th Planet and some subsequent books as well. That this is our solar system. In the course of the years, astronomers, members of the establishment, were shown by people like you this particular part of my book in the cylinder seal, and it's in the museum, and it's known where it was found, and it's known that it's from around 2500 BC, almost 4,500 years ago, and astronomers were asked, so what is it? One case, which is not the part I wanted to tell you, well, I'll tell you that part too, but one instance was, and I get a fax about it, one astronomer, a well-known astronomer, a respected astronomer, who was shown that, says, well, this is definitely a depiction of a solar system, a star, a sun surrounded by planets. But there's no way that the Sumerians, as Sitchin claims, 4,500 years ago could depict it, that they knew it. So what is it? So therefore, it must be of a depiction of another solar system. And I get the fax with this answer by this astronomer. And I took the fax and wrote on the margin, wow, wow, wow. Does he realize what he just said? He said, there's no way the Sumerians could be familiar with our solar system. But they were aware of and could depict another solar system, which may or may not exist somewhere. So when this was shown to him, he realized that he said a stupid thing, and he eventually wrote a book and devoted a relatively nice chapter to me. But that was in the book published in '76. And then a couple of years ago at the most, maybe a year and a half ago, one of my dear friends, I think she's in the audience. Joanne, are you there? Yep, okay. Sends me pages from a very respected, or the most respected, astronomy magazine in the United States with an article, and the picture of the cover of the 12th planet is right there as part of the article. You know, we now have posters duplicating that original cover. And the article is written by one of the leading astronomers in the United States, in this city, in Los Angeles. And he explains pretty fairly what I say. I say that this is a depiction of the sun and the missing planet is Nibiru. It's fair. But he says, since all this is really impossible, so how about a different understanding that the central figure that I say is the sun, what looks like a star, that maybe it's the planet Jupiter. And Jupiter is surrounded by a number of moons, so maybe this is Jupiter surrounded by this. And the way it is laid out, he said, this is a depiction of Jupiter passing through the teapot of Sagittarius. The constellation Sagittarius, which, you know, is depicted like others, you know, with lines drawn, which is not really the way it's in the skies, but that's how it was envisioned. So there's part that if you connect the planets, the dots this way, and the British astronomers, maybe while having 5 o'clock tea, called it the teapot. And they said, so this is Jupiter, he says in a 3 or 4 page article, passing through the teapot of Sagittarius, and therefore what Sitchin says, that this is the sun and our soul, doesn't have to be the way he says it. And I get this, I read it, I say, you know, maybe I'm wrong. And the next day, you know, I wake up and I say, there's something wrong with what this guy says. Jupiter passing through the teapot of Sagittarius. Now Sagittarius, as I've learned, because I had to learn some astronomy for writing these books, Sagittarius is more to the south of the ecliptic, in the plane, the line through which the planets move. And some of the planets, they diverge a little. Jupiter moves almost precisely along the ecliptic. I go to my astronomy books, of course. Jupiter never moves south enough to touch Sagittarius. But maybe I'm wrong. So I wrote 2 letters, one to astronomical people in New York and one in Chicago. And I didn't say why I'm asking, but I said, is it possible for Jupiter to pass through the teapot of Sagittarius? And I got back letters, very nicely responded, saying absolutely no, never. With these 2 letters, I write to the magazine, Sky and Telescope. And I say, reference this and this. This astronomer is wrong, and I would like you to print a correction. Nothing. Not until I threatened some legal action did I hear back, not from the magazine, they never published the correction, but from this astronomer. I get a 2-page letter that says, Dear Zecharia, I've been admiring your writings, you know, from the day you were born, blah, 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 blah. Now, as to the point you make, maybe I was too hasty in saying it's Jupiter. But still, I don't agree with your interpretation of the cylinder scene. So I wrote back to him and said, you don't have to agree with me on this, but I would really like to understand what is the problem that astronomers or other establishment scientists have with accepting the truth of this Sumerian information. What is the problem? Is it a religious problem? Do you have religious problems? Is it an academic? Is it a scientific? I just want to understand, and this is in answer, the short answer to the question. I never get an answer. Nobody of those who say, nobody ever explains why. Some of them, say, the so-called Assyriologists, because I used to attend some of the meetings of various societies of which I am a member until I stopped, come to me and say, of course you are right, but I cannot say so. So, is it that they are afraid for their academic standing? Are they afraid to be made the laughingstock of their colleagues? I don't know. The answer is, I don't know. It does not make sense to me. And when it will end, when this attitude will end, I don't know. I really think that the mass of people who do accept the real truth will force the establishment to change its position. Why don't you read for a change?
How are the giant 900 and 1,100 pound slabs measured by humans to weigh that much if no piece of equipment can lift them?
Well, the weight is of course estimated because nobody actually took those colossal stone blocks and put them on some scale. But if you know what stone they are made of, which is easy to verify, and you measure the size, the cube, and multiply the cube by weight, you get the total weight. There's no dispute about these weights. Nobody says, no, it weighs not 1,100, but whatever.
In Revelations, it says that Armageddon is a place, not an occurrence. Please explain what place and where and why is Armageddon today thought of as an ending instead of a place?
Well, Armageddon is a place coming from the Hebrew Har Megiddo, the Mount of Megiddo, which is just a promontory near Haifa, and the site of many wars in antiquities, because it's very strategic. And where I just said, just east of Haifa. Why is Armageddon today thought of as an ending? Because I assume so. The notion is that this is where the final conflict would take place. The prophet Ezekiel referred it as the final war of Gog and Magog. The Dead Sea Scrolls speak of the final war between the powers of light and the powers of darkness. So it's become a concept rather than only a place.
If it is true that the Mars pyramids are built right by the Mars equator, is that a coincidence that Phobos flies by just by them?
What is the basis for the theory of suspending gold in the atmosphere of Nibiru? Well, this is based on what happened on Nibiru and the explanation that I reached why they came here and how they mined the gold and how they needed workers for the gold mines and created us. So this whole thing is an integral part of the tale. So if you understand how it started, what the problem was, what they did here, what they achieved, where they failed, etc. This is the basis for the theory, as you call it. Really?
In the span of 3,600 years since they were last here, isn't it possible that things, life on their planet could have seriously deteriorated such that even when their planet returns, no one will come from it?
Well, it's possible, but this raises the question of how to explain what's going on this moonlit Phobos. Well, it says here, do you feel that the unrest in the Middle East today has anything to do or related to the return of Nibiru? Now, I spoke yesterday, I spoke today, and I'm saying that the expected return is not of Nibiru, it's of the Anunnaki. So, next opportunity, Marty has, rephrase your question and I'll answer it.
Are some of us Anunnaki from the past? I feel like I have memory of being an Anunnaki.
Well, this goes to it's a very valid question, not to be sneezed at. And this goes to the issue of demigods. And in chapter 6 of Genesis, which was what started me on the subject, there's that the sons of the gods, plural, of Elohim, plural, married the daughters of men and had children by them. So Gilgamesh, for example, who thought that he is entitled to become immortal, which means living the same longevity as the Anunnaki, was described as 2/3, not just half, not a demigod, but as 2/3 divine, let's use the term, because in that case his mother, not his father, but his mother was a goddess. Now Gilgamesh had a son. It's mentioned in the Epic of Gilgamesh and other texts. Those demigods born to this intermarriage described in the Bible between the sons of the Elohim and the daughters of men had also offspring. So do some of us carry to some extent their genes? Of course, because that's how they brought us about to begin with, through genetic engineering, mixing some of their genes with those of hominids, Homo erectus or whatever, then through intermarriage. And if the questioner says that he or she feel like she has a memory of being an Anunnaki, maybe. Why not?
The stone tablets stolen from the basement at the museum in Baghdad. Do you know anything about them and if they talked about Nibiru?
Well, not only tablets, but actual sculptures, which are more admired than the tablets, were stolen. Many were returned, many were found, and are back in the museum. There's a whole debate now whether to reopen the museum to the public or not, whether any of those particular tablets deal with Nibiru. I don't know. Can more detailed questions be submitted to your P.O. Box? Yes. It's P.O. Box 577, New York, New York, 10185. It's on my website. I answer all my mail. What's the question?
Why did the Anunnaki betwixt the humans' language and separate the humans' tribe to different corners of the earth?
Well, this matter of confusing the languages and dispersing mankind which is in the Bible, appears in the Sumerian tablets too. I didn't come across any valid reason. There was some concern among the gods, especially by Enlil, that if mankind continues to be united by a language, it's not good for them, for the Anunnaki. There's no clear answer.
A multiple part question. Why are you and your books and your amazing and indispensable research not required study in all major universities today? And
Well, the answer is not up to me, but why don't you, each one of you, write to their local university and ask the question? I get letters from fans that enclose some clipping from their local newspaper or some magazine and say, this item, this discovery, this thing is exactly what you said in your book, this and this. And I write them back and say, it's nice to know that, but why don't you tell it in a letter to the editor of the newspaper? Why do you tell me that I'm right? Tell it to the newspaper and its readers, and I encourage you to do that. Let's read this.
the new picture of Phobos with the blue area, doesn't it look like a picture of Enki? Some like that, the Nazca lines in Peru. I see a face.
No, I don't know. I didn't see a face, but it's definitely metallic. How did you learn to read or decipher the clay tablets? I devoted a lifetime to it. So there are some, by now there are courses. When I started, Sumerian was not a major or recognized separate subject. And I took some courses at various universities. I taught myself. I pored over books, I pored over tablets. There are various manuals. I think some of them are now on the internet. I think if somebody wants to do it, it's easier than when I started. Why did they leave Earth? Are they still here? Well, we keep asking the same questions. I think somebody said here, read the Lost Book of Enki, read The End of Days. Why are they keeping information from us, of the government? Well, we discussed that. Where does Yeshua, HaMashiach, the Messiah, Yeshua is Hebrew for Jesus, fits into the return of the Anunnaki? I deal with that in the End of Days. Which ancient languages do you recommend to study for more understanding? I would recommend to start with Hebrew. Something about the Vedic text. I did not talk about it today. Again, something I did not talk about. I heard, anonymous, I heard there are space stations on the dark side of the moon. Do you think there is? Well, there's no question of thinking. I mean, are there or aren't there? I don't know. Could there be? The answer is yes. Are there? I don't know. Would you describe what the Anunnaki individuals looked like? Well, first of all, my books are filled with their images, so it's easy to see how they looked. But if sometimes the question is phrased differently and says, I'm asked, do they look like us? And I say, no, we look like them.